Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my review of Doctor Who Series 7, Episode 5, The Angels Take Manhattan, the final episode of Doctor Who Series 7, Part 1, before we get to the Christmas special and the second half of the series, featuring new companion Clara Oswald. But before we get on to any of that, Amy and Rory's final story. So, the Angels Take Manhattan. Before we start, I just want to have a quick say about my feelings on Amy and Rory as characters through Series 7, Part 1, following the Doctor Within the Wardrobe, their cameo at the end, where they're sitting down about to have Christmas dinner. We then see them in Pond Life, where they're having their usual, normal, non-TARDIS journey lives. Before the end of that story ties in with Asylum of the Daleks, where Amy kicks Rory out, or gives him up, as she says in Asylum. Yeah, I don't really buy that either. And then in Asylum of the Daleks, there's the absolute shit divorce plot, which I go into a rant about. See that review/rant for more details, as well as some more details in Pond Life. But there was one point in Asylum of the Daleks where these characters who I'd loved for 2 years by this point, when the story was airing, 2 and a bit years, there was a point where it looked like that the audience shouldn't care about whether they should get back together or not, because the whole divorce plot was so absolute terrible. But there was the bit where Amy slaps Rory because he's saying that he still loves her, more than, well, admittingly saying that he loves her more than she loves him, and she knows that's true. But yeah, and then we get into all of that, all that stuff. But that slap and the whole argument, that was the point of no return for the relationship. But then the other 3 episodes of Series 7, Part 1 happened. Because Amy and Rory made up at the end of Asylum. It was such a contrived way as well, but, the whole thing was contrived. And then throughout the rest of Series 7, Part 1, they've been pretty much fine, normal. The Power Three focused on their relationship, and that and Dinosaurs on a Spaceship built on their relationship with each other, as well as with the Doctor, a bit more. Town Called Mercy didn't really do that, but they were at least it was business as usual for them, but they were still likable. They weren't catty at each other. But after what the Sign of the Daleks did to the characters, these two needed to have a bit of a redemption in the eyes of the audience, and thankfully, Chris Chibnall and to a lesser extent Toby Whithouse made us care about the characters again after Stephen Moffat more or less fucked them over in Asylum of the Daleks, and after the Power Three pretty much was the peak of Amy and Rory relationship with the Doctor. The story wasn't amazing, but in terms of the character relationship, it was at the peak of their three-way relationship. After all that, how does Stephen Moffat decide to write them off, and should we care about it? Well, let's take a look with The Angels Take Manhattan. Okay, before we start, the story in the present day is set in 2012. However, that's only for a few scenes at the start and towards the end, but the most of the story is set in 1938. I'll get back to the 1938 bit, but going back to 2012, it is questionable why they decided to go to New York in 2012. In Power 3, I forgot to mention this in the review, Amy claims that it's been 10 years for her and Rory, but not for the Doctor. And considering the Doctor with on the Wardrobe's final scene took place in 2013, are we now saying that it's now 2014, 15, 16 for their appearances in Series 7 Part 1, but they're now the age of what they would be in 2020 through to 2023? So yeah, that's a bit odd. I'm not quite sure. This is the question about the timeline comes further into play when the Day of the Doctor takes place in 2013. Yet that feels like it's set after the Power Three, I think. The new series timeline under the Moffat era post the Doctor with the Widow and the Wardrobe is confusing, and it's not the first time the new series' timeline has been confusing. Even in the Russell T Davies era, it could be confusing because events from Series 1, Aliens of London, through to Journey's End felt like they were taking place a year ahead, or 2 years ahead in the year that never was with the Series 3 finale. But I don't think that... But there was inconsistencies with the spin-offs, I think, with like in Torchwood Miracle Day, they say Gwen was recruited in October 2006, when that should have been October 2007. And I'm also not entirely sure when the Torchwood and Sarah Jane stories take place within the timelines as well. Furthermore, it appears that all the Series 4 stuff happened in early 2009, unless Planet of the Dead and the End of Time take place in 2010, but they're apparently in 2009. So the Russell T Davies era's timeline was a bit confusing in places, as is the Stephen Moffat era's post The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe. And the classic series also had some dateline inconsistencies, specifically with the unit dating thing. So yeah, this is another complicated and convoluted Doctor Who timeline dating thing. Yay. I think the current era at the moment is saying it is 2020, so the 13th Doctor Adventures took place in 2018, 19, and 20 for the present day set ones. So I think with the 12th Doctor, and especially with 13, they've gotten the dates under control, more or less. It's just a shame things got very complicated towards the end of the 11th Doctor's era. The datings for Series 5 and 6 present day episodes were fine, but then afterwards, at least for 11, it got a bit complicated, well, at least in the Amy and Rory stories did anyway. And as for 1938, this is the third story to take place in 1938, this time in New York, and it seems like this is a problematic year, specifically around New York, as the Doctor and as the Weeping Angels have somehow taken over New York in 1938, and they've now populated it with lots of Weeping Angels to send people back in time. However, they send people back in time to this apartment building that has people live out the rest of their years there. So basically, what the Angels are planning is to send people back in time and then send to make them live the rest of their lives at this apartment, so that they can feed on not only on the potential energy, but then to keep hold of them just in case. So that seems to be their plan this time. This battery farm, so to speak. Okay, that's a questionable motivation of what they want to do. I mean, after Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone, they're back to their what we know them from Blink as their mode of killing, sending people back in time and feeding on the potential energy that they could have had in the future, as well as the way they're moving is back to how they are in Blink, and getting rid of that stupid seeing them moving bit in Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone. That was a detractor of that story, but the whole battery farm thing and holding on to their victims, okay, we'll roll with it. Is it necessary though? I mean, if they've already sent the potential energy of their victims, they've got the potential energy of their future, then why hold on to them? Is that so they can take any more potential energy? And what would they do when they've been sent back in time? If they're being kept at least when people sent back in time by the Angels in Blink, they lived out their lives in the past, but now they're being restricted to this building, so it doesn't really make much sense, unless they're allowed to live their lives in the past, but they've still got to live at the battery farm. And would they be sent back in time far enough so that apartment building was built, or would they end up there eventually? It's not really entirely explained. They just explain that the Weeping Angels hold on to their victims at the battery farm. And for whatever reason, the Angels decide to send Rory back in time for some apparent reason. If you've watched Samuel Davis's video on the history of the Weeping Angels, and he talks about their appearances in the show and in expanded media, it appears that the Weeping Angels met the Doctor, Amy, and Rory several times in different pieces of expanded media, and it's by the time of this story, it seemed like the Angels had gotten a grudge, a vendetta against Amy and Rory specifically. So yeah, especially considering how few stories with the Weeping Angels take place after this story in the timeline of the Doctor, with the 11th, 12th, and 13th Doctors, there is very little compared to how much 11 had prior to this story, or even some of the other Doctors had prior. In terms of TV, we haven't had a proper Weeping Angel story since this one. They've mainly been restricted to cameos. They were going to be the main villains of Class Series 2, but Class was cancelled after one series, so we'll never know what they were going to do there. So yeah, this is the last proper Weeping Angel television story, and it tries to go back to the lore of Blink, scrapping some stuff from the Series 5 two-parter, but at the same time, it's adding stuff that is questionable with the battery farm. They're holding on to it, holding on to their victims. It's a bit strange. And the Weeping Angel Statue of Liberty. What on earth What? Okay, I can understand the theory behind it. Like, this could be what we could have the Statue of Liberty be the Weeping Angel, but firstly, it's not a stone statue; it's copper. Secondly, how would anyone not notice that thing moving from Liberty Island to Winter Key? Thirdly, because of the stuff established in Series 5, wouldn't all the images of the Statue of Liberty be a Weeping Angel? Fourthly, wouldn't that Weeping Angel have come after the Doctor in previous adventures in New York, like in Daleks in Manhattan, for example? It could have gone after the Doctor while trying to steal the Daleks' thunder, just like in that Titan comic adventure with 10 and 13 teaming up, and it steals Nastine's thunder, or again stealing the Daleks' thunder in New York in 1965 and go after the first Doctor. Or any other time they're in New York. Maybe the Statue of Liberty is in New York, perhaps. Or a remake one of it, in which case maybe they're okay there. So, yeah, and finally, it doesn't do anything. The Weeping Angel Statue of Liberty doesn't do anything. We got this pre-title scene, which feels like which sets up as a detective noir, which doesn't actually go anywhere apart from establishing the character of Grail, as well as setting up the Weeping Angel battery farm without the exposition. Though when we're following the main characters, we get introduced to these things anyway. So this whole pre-title thing didn't really need to be in the story, not really. And then it ends with the reveal of the Weeping Angel Statue of Liberty, and then it's revealed again at the when Rory and Amy are on the same rooftop that the detective is on. And we also hear it's stomping in the background sometimes, and the characters are wondering what is that, and we, the audience, know it's the Statue of Liberty, and that refers back to my point of how no one noticed it moving from Liberty Island to Winter Key, and it makes all that noise. Is it a perception filter, or are people just blind? No, that can't be right. This is New York. No one would not have noticed this in New York, 1938. So the whole thing with this, and again, like I said, it doesn't do anything. Maybe it scares the victims to stay where they are until the smaller Weeping Angels come for them, but or they jump off the building in case of Roar and Amy. More on that later. But the Statue of Liberty Weeping Angel doesn't work. It's if it was a hologram maybe or image, in which case it still would be a Weeping Angel, but it would be not the real Statue of Liberty. Then it would scare its victims into realizing they can't escape. Otherwise, they either die or they be sent back in time and forced to live their life in the past. But that's not what it is. It's the actual Statue of Liberty. Nice one, Stephen Moffat. Nice one. One positive thing about the Weeping Angels I can say is that we do have the sense of any statue could be a Weeping Angel or part of the Weeping Angels race, as we see various random statues being Weeping Angels. We also have the cherubs, which are baby Weeping Angels, around. Although, again, they're not really there for necessary. One of them sends Rory back in time, apparently, and another one sends him back when he's in 1938. He sends him to Winter Key. Why Grail has them in the basement in the first place, and why they just didn't send Rory to Winter Key in the first place is questionable. Maybe he was nearby to Winter Key, but they picked him up when River found him, and then they just teleported him there again. It's just, I can buy the chase aspect. If the Doctor, Amy, and River are chasing Rory being sent across space and time, I can buy that. This could be a new version of the chase, but with Weeping Angels and a horror element. But that's not what this is. They just have that as a minor aspect. Another good thing about this one is, I think I may have already mentioned it, is that the Weeping Angels are moving again, like they were in Blink. It's just the quick movements. You don't see them moving properly. It's the lights are on, black out for a second, and then they've moved into a different position or something. Or throughout different shots, we've seen that they've moved off screen, or when the audience isn't looking, or any of the characters. So they're back to what they were like in Blink in terms of movement. But that's about it. It's for the positives of the Weeping Angels. The Weeping Angels themselves, they just, I don't know why they're doing this, and it does seem like they have a vendetta against Rory Williams and to a lesser extent Amy Pond. So Yeah, unless they're desperate to hold on to their victims. The good news for Amy, Rory, and the Doctor is that River Song is on the Angels' trails. She's trying to investigate them, so to speak. She's investigating them and posing as a detective, Melody Malone, who writes this book that the Doctor has. He's reading it. From the cover and from the name of the detective, um, the Doctor, Amy, and Rory couldn't put two and two together and realize, oh, hang on, it's River Song. Um, as she's a angel detective, and when Rory meets her and they're picked up by Grail's men, he goes, "Your Melody. If I was writing this script, I would add a line where River would say, yes, that's my birth name. That's what Mummy called me," or something along those lines. But yeah, I would have added that little bit for a bit of light humor. I know it's a horror episode, but I can add a little bit of light humor. Um, so yeah, but it's a bit strange that the characters never didn't put two and two together. Even when Rory met her, he still had to realize that River was being Melody Malone in this situation. But still, and how did Grail's men find her, and why did they take Rory with her? Them, unless they knew he was with her. But then why did they throw him down the basement? And maybe if they knew he was an angel victim, in which case, why did they pick him up? Unless it was to help the angels transport. It doesn't make sense. Why? It doesn't make sense. Some of this is just confusing. And apparently the whole New York 1938 is time blocked or something. Somehow the TARDIS can't get to New York 1938. It's well, they just say 1938, which is odd because both the Doctor and the Widow and the Wardrobe first couple scenes and most of Let's Kill Hitler were set in 1938. They're in different countries. Well, started Doctor, Widow and the Wardrobe started in space, then went to the UK, and then Let's Kill Hitler was back in Germany. But but for some reason, 1938 as a year just seems to be a difficult year to land. Not just New York 1938, and this ties in with the ending as well. But I'll get onto that later. So it's just a bit confusing, and the Doctor has to go to, I think, is it Qin or Min era China to have some sort of way to get into 1938 without having the TARDIS having some problems. I'm not quite sure. Is it explained? I'm not quite sure, but I don't know. Something's gone wrong with 1938, specifically New York 1938. Also introduced to the guy Grail, who's a crime boss, and he's a collector, and one of the things he's collected is a damaged weeping angel, which is screaming, and the other angels can hear it, and they're probably coming. Although why the angel grabs River's wrist, I'm not quite sure. You would have thought it wouldn't want to do what Grail wanted it to do. And that brings up the whole River breaking her wrist bit. I'll quickly go into that. Because Amy reads that in the book, the Doctor tells her it's fixed point, that he has to do that, in which case although he says he only has to actually say it, to be honest, doesn't he? Because Amy reads the line in the book, but she doesn't read that the Doctor actually goes ahead and does it. So he's now convinced that he now has to break something because Amy read it in the book, and it turns out to be River's wrist from the Angel's grasp. But he doesn't actually have to break River's wrist because Amy read the sentence in the book, but she didn't read the actual description. And then he leaves River to do it herself, to try and not break her wrist, or to try to get out without breaking it. And then River tricks him into pretending that she broke out without breaking her wrist, but it turns out she has. So the Doctor could easily have broken the Angel's wrist, even though Amy read the line where River's asking why he has to break her wrist, but he could still have gone on to break the Angel's wrist anyway, so to change the future, just like he left River to do it. And then I don't know why there's some reason River decides not to tell the Doctor. There's an explanation, but I can't quite remember it, and I don't think it's that great anyway. And then the Doctor heals her wrist with regeneration energy. Again, this is before the time of the Doctor established. This is the final incarnation of the first set of the Doctor's regeneration energy. Again, this is pre-Time's Child, so we know there's a whole bunch before that as well. So let's say this is but counting the Timeless Child as sort of separate, and then we got the Doctor. Even if it's the same person, it's sort of separate. I won't go into it now because that's a talk for another time. But as to say, Timeless Child, memories wiped, maybe even regenerated into the first Doctor as a child or a baby. Then the regeneration's capped to 12 further regenerations, and then first Doctor lives out the lives, thinking that they're the first one, which technically they are. And then we're now at the 11th Doctor, who's used up all 13 lives, as we'll get to explain in the time of the Doctor, thanks to the inclusion of the War Doctor and David Tennant not wanting to go in the Stolen Earth and Journey's End. And possibly the Roof Doctor could be between the second and third Doctors, but that's a theory at the moment. And if that's the case, then the Doctor would have actually gotten an additional incarnation, so because the Time Lords would have erased the memories of that incarnation, and to make them not think they're one incarnation down, they gave him the Doctor an extra one to come after their 13th one, which would then mean the actual final incarnation would have been David Tennant the second. And then Matt Smith is the additional one before the end of the 14 incarnation lineup. Again, that's a theory, that's not confirmed yet. I'm actually hoping that the Fugitive Doctor turns out to be the 14th Doctor, but that's me. That's me personally. Again, I'm not going to go too much into detail about that because that's not relevant to this story. This is about the time of Angels, but no, it's not. It's about Angels Take Manhatten. But I'm bringing it up because of the regeneration energy. Because the 11th Doctor is technically on the last life of the first set of the Doctor's regenerations, again, discluding the Timeless Child stuff and discluding any potential theories about the Roof Doctor, if we just focus it on the first 13 incarnations of the Doctor from the first Doctor played by William Hartnell, if we just focus on that, the 11th Doctor, as played by Matt Smith, is technically the last of the first set of incarnations before they're given a new set of incarnations in the time of the Doctor. So, because that's before that story comes around, the 11th Doctor at this point in time is still Doctor 11. He's the 11th Doctor. He's the 11th incarnation, and he's in the 11th life. But in reality, he's the 11th Doctor, but he's on his 12th incarnation, and it's his 13th life due to the War Doctor and David Tennant regenerating into himself. Or the 10th Doctor regenerating into himself, I should say. And yet, we see here that the 11th Doctor has regeneration energy to spare. Somehow. Maybe he got it from River, because she uses her remaining regenerations to save the Doctor. But perhaps, maybe it's some of that, perhaps. But, yeah. At this point in time, we thought there were still 2 more Doctors left. So the use of the regeneration energy would work here. But in hindsight, it now, apart from theoretically possibly the last bit of River's final regeneration energy going into him from Let's Kill Hitler, apart from that, theoretically being some of that or the last of that, it doesn't really add up. And in that story, Let's Kill Hitler, they said regeneration disabled. The Doctor thought he could regenerate, but the regeneration was disabled due to the poison. So as I said there, he shouldn't have been able to regenerate anyway, even if the poison that he'd been poisoned with would have disabled the regeneration. Even if it was a different method of death, he wouldn't be able to regenerate anyway. Okay, and then after he heals River's wrist, she then slaps him because it's a waste of regeneration energy. And then Amy has a go at him, has a quick go at him as well. Amy and River snap at the Doctor for no reason. Amy does confront River about lying, but like I said, River's explanations just don't add up. And it doesn't feel fair on the Doctor to be snapped at by both River and Amy. Maybe River because she's pissed off that the Doctor wasted his energy, but regeneration energy, but still not entirely makes sense. It's even more so for Amy. I don't know why they snap at him. Okay, so what else is there? So, after when they get to Winter Key, Amy and Rory decide to run together, and they decide to run throughout time and space. This should have been episode 1. This should have been episode 1, and series 7 part 1 should have been a chase-like style, like The Chase, but for the modern series. It should have been the Doctor, Amy, Rory, and maybe River as well, on the run from the Weeping Angels. This should have been the first episode, and then they'd go on the run across time and space, and the angels would chase them until eventually maybe they get back to where they started, or perhaps to a secluded place where they have to make a final stand, or maybe to a familiar place where they meet their demise or whatever. Just maybe series 7 part 1 episodes 1 to 5, maybe it should just in this arc along the lines of The Chase, where it's a 5-part adventure where maybe not necessarily 5 episode adventure like Trial of the Time Lord or something, but just a connected 5-part story where they are on the run. Maybe the Weeping Angels just in the first and last story, but they're on the run, having to move from place to place before the Angels catch up with them. Maybe the Angels could cameo in the other 3 episodes, maybe, but not have major things to do. It would make sense. That would have been a great way to wrap up Amy and Rory's story, a 5 or 6 episode story along the lines of The Chase, in a maybe even might even have been a good 5 or 6 parts story. Heck, it could have even been a mini series in itself. Series 7 could have been a 6-episode mini series, and then the episodes with Clara could have been series 8. They just have to add a few more episodes to that one. So, yeah, it would have made a lot more sense. Instead, it's only a few minutes of Amy and Rory running upstairs to the roof. By the way, how did the Doctor and River escape? I'm not quite sure how they're called by angels, but then they managed to run, I guess. Now, I will say the stuff on the roof is really great when Rory decides to cause a paradox by him jumping off the roof so that he wouldn't be sent back in time to so that he grow up old and end up in that bed and die that night in Winter Key after living a whole life. He decides that in order to stop the angels, he needs to cause a paradox. This bit around here with him talking to Amy about it is really great. We've got some really great drama between the two, some great interaction, and I suppose it brings their character arcs full circle, to a point, I guess. And to be honest, Rory is kind of correct when if he jumps off the roof, he will be causing a paradox. However, Rory is mostly confident, at least until just before he does it. He's more or less confident that he's also going to survive it as well. Stop the paradox and then survive, because he's died so many times. Is that why he died so many times in series 5 and series 6? Stephen Moffat is so that it could be a recurring thing that he could say, because I've survived so many times, I survived death so many times, I think I will survive this time round. He's not completely certain, but he's mostly confident. So, yeah. Amy decides to join him because it's Together or Not at All, which this definitely is. These two have definitely come a long way since Asylum of the Daleks, because that story, I think they pretty much would have done. They wouldn't have done anything for each other because of the whole shit divorce subplot. Yeah, Asylum of the Daleks was pretty pointless, wasn't it? In terms of for these two characters, because the rest of this half of the series has been kind of having a lot of Amy Rory Doctor relationship, especially the Power 3. Not so much in Town Called Mercy, but because it's been leading all to this, the stuff in Asylum of the Daleks really now really doesn't work. Even more so than it already did. It was absolute shit in that story, but now it's even worse because it doesn't make sense in the context of the rest of the half of the series, especially these last 2 episodes with the Power 3 and the Angels Take Manhattan. So what was the point of it? This is a much better Amy Rory relationship in this story. So well done, Stephen Moffat. You've kind of redeemed yourself, sort of. So the two of them jump off the roof. The Doctor forgets to acknowledge Rory while screaming Amy, but he forgets to say Rory. But the whole paradox thing does work, and everything is back to normal. They end up in a graveyard in 2012, which the Doctor and Amy ended up in earlier after their first attempt to arrive. In 1938, and we see see the Rory's grave there as a kind of foreshadowing. Anyway, so everyone ends up at the graveyard, and they all decide to go down to the pub for a family outing. Well, after this adventure, they'll need it. However, Rory sticks around to notice his grave, and it turns out a weeping angel had survived and sent him back in time. Not exactly sure when back in time. It could have been back to 1938. It could have been possibly earlier, possibly later, but it turns out, so the angel sent him back then, and because of the paradox, they couldn't go back in time and save him, and if another paradox would cause New York to rip apart. So they can't go back and save Rory. But what's wrong with meeting him outside of New York? They could still go back to the same year, or maybe stick around for a year until 1939, and then go and pick them up from somewhere else, maybe somewhere else in America, or take a boat back to Britain or something, or wherever. Just get out of New York, as the 10th Doctor said in Evolution of the Daleks. Just get out of New York and maybe wait a year or something. I don't know, but it's not like they cannot go back, just so long as they didn't go back to New York in 1938. And then Amy decides, because she loves Rory so much. Again, Asylum of the Daleks really tried to say otherwise, and it is now looking really bad for doing that. Even worse for doing so. But because of the rest of the series is the character development of Amy and Rory. Okay, not so much a Town Called Mercy, but you know what I mean. And all that they've been through, Amy decides that she would rather stick with Rory rather than with the Doctor, and allows herself to be taken by the Weeping Angel. Both Rory and Amy should not actually have been taken by the Weeping Angel. Although Rory is not looking at it and he's blinking at Amy, Amy would have might have just seen the Weeping Angel just before Rory was taken. Possibly it was within her eyesight, so it shouldn't have actually done anything to Rory. Not really, unless it was thinking, she doesn't notice me, I'll just quickly zap him back in time before I do anything else. And then when it's Amy's turn, she turns around to look at the Doctor, and then she gets zapped back in time. Now, once with Rory, like I said, maybe Amy wasn't looking at the Angel properly. Maybe she didn't notice it. Maybe, well, actually, no, I think she did notice it. Maybe the Angel thought it didn't notice her. But this time, with Amy being taken back, it knows the Doctor and River are both looking at it. So why does it take Amy? Why does it zap Amy and Rory when someone else is looking at them? Amy and Rory are looking away, yeah, but when Rory's taken, Amy's looking at the Angel, and when Amy's taken, the Doctor and River are. So, yeah, that Angel is basically breaking its own laws. It's no wonder they never appeared in the TV series in a major capacity again. It's because this angel broke the laws of the Weeping Angels, even more so than the Angels tried to do over this story and Time of Angels /Stone. But this one went one step further than the rest of them. So now they've been relegated to cameo roles in the rest of the TV series, and then in Class, Series 2 got cancelled, so that we can't do anything with what they were setting up at the end of Series 1 for them. And they've never appeared since. I think the last TV appearance was the last episode of Class. Yeah, that was 2016. That's it for their TV appearances. So no more stories in Doctor Who or spin-off material, spin-off media, the TV ones anyway, where the Weeping Angels are main threats, and they're relegated to cameos. And even then, there's only 2 more episodes of the show where they're cameoing, plus that 1 episode of Class. The 2 Doctor Who episodes were the Time of the Doctor and Hell-Bent. In both cases, they didn't need to be there, especially in Hell-Bent. At Time of the Doctor, I can make the argument, but Hell-Bent, no. So yeah, this is the last proper Weeping Angel story, besides the cameos in the last 2 Doctor Who cameos and the 1 Class cameo. But with Class Series 2 not being made, that's it from the proper Weeping Angel stories. There were none in the Capaldi era. Maybe there'll be one in the Whittaker era. I don't know. Chris Chibnall's in charge of that, besides the Stephen Moffat's baby. But then again, Big Finish have gotten their hands on both that and River Song, who is also Stephen Moffat's baby. Not actual baby. This is metaphoric. This creation, storyteller. Fiction creation, like how Terry Nation's babies are the Daleks, or one of them anyway. They're one of Terry Nation's babies. But yeah, unless the 13th Doctor or a future Doctor is going to meet them in a story later down the line, I don't think we're going to be seeing the Weeping Angels again, either as a main villain or even as cameo appearances. So that's really about it. And in all honesty, with this story, they kind of go on a weak note. They kind of break their own laws, and it ends on a sour note for them. Amy and Rory's departure, the first part of it was handled really well and emotionally, with the whole paradox stopping. But then Rory was unceremoniously sent back in time. And whilst there was a great emotional bit for the Doctor, Amy, and River, Amy's reasoning for being sent back in time, like Rory's, just doesn't make sense in the context of the Weeping Angel lore. They shouldn't have been able to the Angels shouldn't have sent them back in time if someone was looking at them. especially with Amy, because the Doctor and River were still looking at them. So the Angels Take Manhattan is just, Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone kind of damaged the Weeping Angel lore from Blink already to a near point of no return. Angels Take Manhattan tried to go back to that sort of direction, but ended up failing with doing it. The final scene of the episode sees River convincing the Doctor to that he should travel. He should travel and not travel alone. Oh, and she can somehow get to 1938 New York because of the vortex manipulator, as she explained earlier. And now she can somehow get to 1938 or 1939 New York so that she can send the book to Amy to be published, and Amy becomes a writer back then and has a books publishing. We get an Amelia Williams written book appearing in the Bells of St. John, which we'll get to. Well, the episode we'll get to at least. We might comment it about this in the this book in the review, but we'll see. But yeah, and so Amy becomes a writer back then. Well, her job keeps swapping out throughout this series. She's a model, as established in Closing Time, but then in Dinosaur, and that's what we see her at the start of the Son of the Daleks doing. But then in Closing Time, she's doing other jobs, and then in The Power of Three, she's a travel writer. Yeah, and Amy's not going to be the only Moffat companion who keeps swapping jobs. At least Rory goes from a nurse to a doctor. He's at least a natural progression for him, especially over these big time gaps I addressed earlier. But yeah, and now Amy's a writer, apparently. That does kind of make sense with the travel writing, and I suppose she'll have to do something whilst back in time. I wonder if young Amelia ever read one of her future self's novels then. Um, yeah, but Amy writes afterward at the end of the book for the Doctor to read, the final page. It's lucky it was only 1 or 2 pages long, and she convinces the Doctor to go and talk to her younger self about telling her she's because she's got to wait so long, he's going to give her a few stories of what to look forward to, and that's where we tie into that bit with the 11th hour, where young Amelia is sitting outside and she hears the TARDIS sounds. Although how that works with the Big Bang, when the Doctor tucks her back in bed, at the in that episode, and then tells her a story there, that doesn't quite time with that, but we could theorize that Amelia woke up, put her gear back on, and went to sit outside and in the morning and wait. And then the Doctor from here came back to talk to her, to tell her about the adventures she'll experience in the future. And it's a nice ending, actually. It connects with the 11th hour really nicely, and it's also very much like the ending of The Hand of Fear with Sarah Jane, with the final shot of this episode going into kind of a brown colour and then pausing on the image, I think, which is similar to Sarah Jane's final episode, where The Hand of Fear Part 4 ended on a still shot of Sarah Jane. Then again, in quite a few of those stories in 1976, 77, did end on a kind of a still frame for no reason. Deadly Assassin Part 3 is the most infamous, because of the still frame of the Doctor being drowned by the villain of that, a villain of that story, not the main villain, a secondary villain. But it is still a nice kind of callback to the Hand of Fear, whether intentionally or not, but it's still quite nice. So, The Angels Take Manhattan. Again, very mixed. Another mediocre Stephen Moffat story. He's done some good stuff in some episodes, but since A Good Man Goes to War, Stephen Moffat has been writing mediocrity. I did like some stuff of Wedding River Song and some stuff in this one, and I liked parts of The Doctor with the Widow in the Wardrobe, but none of them are much better than Method. They're all meh. They're all mediocre. We haven't had a full good Stephen Moffat story since A Good Man Goes to War. And to be honest, I think the next one and the next episode's not going to be the first one since then. I think the earliest story coming up to be the first good story since A Good Man Goes to War is probably The Bells of St. John, if not The Name of the Doctor, if not The Day of the Doctor. So, yeah, Stephen Moffat is kind of in a mediocre situation at the moment. So positives about Angels Take Manhattan are the drama, the emotional drama between the main characters, the acting, again, brilliant. and the Weeping Angels are trying to take them back to their Blink origins. However, into the negatives now, they don't really succeed with that, beyond the fact that they're back to moving properly, not how like they were in Flesh and Stone, and that any statue could be a statue. But besides that, the Weeping Angels are kind of poor in this story, beyond going back to their Blink roots. The cherubs weren't really that necessary. Grail wasn't that necessary. And whilst the Paradox thing was great, the Angel sending Rory and Amy back afterwards didn't make sense. It felt like a cop-out. It felt like a cop-out. If Amy and Rory had died from that Paradox, or at the very least, have them be sent back in time when no one is looking at them, or when if Rory turns around and blinks, and then there's the Angel there, and then Amy goes after him or something. No, it's not working. It doesn't work. No, doesn't work. Overall, the Angels Take Manhattan is a bit of a muddle. It's a bit of a mess. It's got some good stuff going for it. It's an enjoyable romp, and it's a good horror story, but it's a mess as well. It's not that great. It's all right. It's meh. So I will be giving the Angels Take Manhattan a 5 out of 10. I was going to say this was a 6, but then I decided to lower it down to a 5. This story has some good stuff going for it, but when you stop to think about it, it gets worse. It's a very questionable story. It's a bit messy, and it's trying to do some things for maybe more for excitement purposes and for emotional purposes, but it sometimes doesn't quite work. There are some good moments, like the Paradox and the Amy and Rory going together, jumping off together, but the rest of it, not so much. It's just a mess. It's a muddle mess. This is the weakest companion exit story since Dragonfire. Is it worse than Dragonfire? Well, I ranted on Dragonfire, so probably not. And I was about to give this one a 6 as well, so yeah, I think this one's better than Dragonfire, but this is the weakest companion exit story since Dragonfire, which is a massive shame. It's not going to be the worst one overall. We've got one way worse coming up, and fun fact, it's a Stephen Moffat written one, yay. But the Angels Take Manhattan is a mess, a mediocre mess. Amy and Rory deserved better, but on the plus side, it wasn't a son of the Daleks, so they were at least treated better than that story, but they still deserved better than this. Well, the emotional bit with the Paradox was fine, it was great, but then the actual being zapped by the Weeping Angel at the very end was a massive slap in the face, especially considering, it wouldn't have been if the way it was done wasn't a slap in the face, because that devalues what the Weeping Angels were like. Like what I meant earlier with the whole breaking their law stuff. So, yeah, it's a pretty weak way for Amy and Rory to go. Especially after the powerful Paradox bending thing. This is quite a shame, really. On a final note, despite what I said about Asylum of the Daleks, where after that point of no return, where I didn't care that if Amy and Rory got back together or anything after that point, the following 4 episodes did make me care again. So I was caring again for Amy and Rory by the time this story aired, and now I am sad to see them go. Especially considering these were the companions I'd seen the most episodes with. Well, Amy was, at least. I did some calculations because I only started watching the series properly with the Idiot's Lantern, so I only saw 7 episodes with Rose Tyler as the incumbent companions. Well, 10 technically, because I'd seen 3 previous ones beforehand, but with Idiot's Lantern, that was my first proper one, and then I caught up on the rest of the series after she'd already left in Doomsday. So I'd only really seen 7 to 10 episodes as the incumbent companion. Martha and Donna only had 13 episodes a series, plus a Christmas special for Donna, Runaway Bride, not End of Time. That was a guest appearance for her, to be the incumbent companions. With Amy, it's been about 31. I calculated 31 out of the 33 episodes from the 11th hour to the time of the Angels, because she was a cameo in Closing Time and The Doctor, The Widow, and the Wardrobe, meaning she was the incumbent companion for 31 episodes, and Rory about 25 of those, I believe. Which means Amy Pond, as of the Angels Take Manhattan, has the most episodes of an incumbent new series companion. Rory is third after Rose, and if we go by stories, Amy is first, and Rory and Rose are joint second. I believe it's 26 for Amy and 21 for Rose and Rory. So at this point in time, Amy Pond had the most number of episodes and the most number of stories as the incumbent companion of the new series. I think that record is beaten by Clara Oswald, but we'll get to her. But yeah, and because I only saw 7 to 10 episodes of Rose as incumbent companion, and Martha and Donna only had 13 to 14 each. Amy and Rory were the companions I more or less grew up with, I guess. If I grew up with the 10th and 11th Doctors in my child and / preteen years, because I was about 13 when this episode aired. So prior to teenage years, my Doctors were David Tennant and Matt Smith, and my companions technically would be Rose Tyler, Martha Jones, Donna Noble, Amy Pond, and Rory Williams, but mainly Amy Pond and Rory Williams as the ones I grew up with the most. As like I said, I only saw 7 to 10 of Rose's episodes on broadcast, and then Donna and Martha only had 13 or 14 each. So Amy and Rory, they had 25 to 31 plus 2 additional cameos. One story of which they had their names in the title sequence. So yeah, these were the ones I grew up with the most in between the ages of 10 and 13. So yeah, so they've been the ones I've been around with the longest at this point in time, and it was a shame to see them go. I have to admit, I was sad to see them go on the episode's broadcast. I was a little teary-eyed. I wasn't crying like I was with Rose. I was 7 back then, but I still got teary-eyed at the end of after the Angels Take Manhattan aired. I was teary-eyed that these characters I'd known for just over 2 and a bit years were gone. That was it. They're gone. It was a shame. We didn't even get 7. We only had 5 more episodes of them in this series. It was a shame we didn't get 6 or 7 in Series 7 Part 1. I know they were saving most of them for the new companion, but it was still a shame to see Amy and Rory going. So I'd just like to say thank you to Amy Pond and Rory Williams and their actors Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill for being absolutely fantastic. Here's to you. Make that a double toast because there's 2 of you. So yeah, that's it from Amy and Rory. Only A Sign of the Daleks was the only time I didn't care for the characters, and that's due to what was in the script. But thankfully, the rest of Series 7 Part 1 made me care about them again in time for their final story. So Series 7 Part 1 did something right. Well, apart from the first episode, obviously. But it's not all bad news, as whilst this is the end of the Angels Take Manhattan and the end of the Pond story, the Doctor Who story continues, as next time, the Doctor encounters an old enemy and meets a new companion. I'll see you guys next time for the 2012 Christmas special, The Snowmen. Goodbye. Right, that's it, everybody. Amy and Rory are gone now. Time to bring out the tissues. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Nicholas Payne Retro YouTube channel.